The morning started like any other. Mist curled off the surface of Pine Ridge Lake, soft and ghostly, while my fishing line whispered through the air and landed with a gentle plop. For 23 years, this had been my ritual. The lake wasn't just water. It was therapy, memory, and peace. But that morning, peace shattered with a shrill voice cutting through the dawn like broken glass. "You're trespassing on HOA property," she screeched. I turned, slow and steady, to see her, Margaret Wyndham, or as the neighbors whispered, the new self-proclaimed queen of the lake. Designer sweater, phone already in her hand, eyes gleaming with the smugness of someone who thought rules bent to her will. She pointed at me like I was a criminal caught red-handed, not a man fishing on his own land. 15 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser rolled down the gravel path. Tires crunched, doors creaked, and out stepped Deputy Morrison, a man I'd known since we were kids. His eyes flicked from me to Margaret, and I could see the weight of discomfort pulling at his shoulders. "Sorry, Theo," he muttered, voice low. "She filed a complaint. I gotta ask you to leave." Behind him, Margaret folded her arms, lips curling into the satisfied smile of someone who believed she had finally won. The kind of smile that begged for a reckoning. I packed up my tackle box without a word. The sharp snap of it closing echoed across the water like a gunshot. But inside I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was amused, because Margaret Wyndham had just declared war without realizing the battlefield wasn't hers. It was mine, and I owned every drop of that lake. Pine Ridge Lake had been in my family long before HOA brochures and gated community attitudes came rolling in. My grandfather bought the land back in the 1950s, when it was nothing more than wild woods, deep water, and promise. He passed it to my father, and when my wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer, I inherited it myself. That cabin? I built it board by board, nail by nail. Each swing of the hammer dulled the ache in my chest. The lake became my sanctuary. Every dawn, I'd walk down the gravel path, boots crunching in rhythm with the calls of loons, and cast my line into water that felt like it held the memory of everyone I'd lost and everything I'd survived. The community back then was simple. Old fishermen, retired teachers, families who came out on weekends to barbecue and patch up their little shacks. Nobody cared about perfect lawns or flashy cars. If your truck had more rust than paint, no one batted an eye. We shared what we had, borrowed what we didn't, and respected the lake as if it were a living relative. That peace lasted until the newcomers arrived. With them came big houses, manicured hedges, and people more worried about property values than community. Leading the charge was Margaret Wyndham. Fresh from a messy divorce, she swept in with her BMW, her designer clothes, and her corporate solutions. From day one, she treated the lake not as nature but as an asset. Within weeks, she held community meetings in her pristine living room, complete with PowerPoints about safety, liability, and value optimization. Neighbors who just wanted peace suddenly felt like they were trapped in a boardroom. That's when she proposed the one thing guaranteed to poison everything, an HOA. Margaret pitched it like she was offering salvation. "We need rules," she declared, flipping through slides of staged photographs showing tidy lawns and uniform docks. "Without order, our property values will plummet. Safety will be at risk. We need structure." Some of the newcomers nodded along. They didn't know better. But the old-timers, people like Betty with her garden gnomes and Frank with his vegetable patch, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Structure wasn't what they moved here for. Within a month, laminated signs appeared around the lake like weeds after a storm. Private HOA property. Members only. They gleamed in the sun, cold and ugly, scars across a place that had always been free and shared. Then came the letters, neatly typed, full of legal buzzwords, demanding that every homeowner enroll in the HOA for a monthly fee. $200. Mandatory. I called Margaret myself, trying to keep it polite. "Ma'am," I said, "I've been fishing this lake since '99. I don't need an HOA. Her voice turned colder than January ice. "Mr. Blackstone, this isn't optional. This affects everyone's investment. You either comply or face consequences." I laughed, not out of disrespect, but at the sheer audacity. "Ma'am," I told her, "I don't have investments. I have a home." The silence on the other end stretched longer than a church sermon. Then she hung up. 2 weeks later, the sheriff was standing on my path, asking me to pack up my tackle box. Once Margaret tasted a little power, she couldn't stop. Violation notices hit mailboxes like junk flyers. Betty was fined for her gnomes, each one suddenly an aesthetic disruption. The Johnsons were cited for an unsafe dock that had stood safely since the 1980s. Even Frank's vegetable garden, yes, vegetables, was declared non-compliant. The laughter stopped in the community. People started whispering, worrying. Margaret strutted down driveways in her heels, personally delivering fines like a sheriff in her own Wild West. She set her binoculars on me. From her deck, she watched every cast of my line, snapping photos like I was smuggling contraband instead of base. Then she hired a security guard, some poor kid barely out of high school, stationed at the boat launch with instructions to photograph trespassers. I greeted him with a smile. "Morning, son. What authority do you have out here?" He shifted uncomfortably. HOA told me to take pictures." "Permission from who exactly?" The HOA?" I cast my line right in front of him. "Well, enjoy the view. Make sure you get my good side." The kid lasted 3 days before quitting. Margaret wasn't done. Next came certified letters, stamped and serious, demanding compliance with lake access restrictions. Then noise complaints about my boat motor. Health department inspections over my septic tank. She even claimed I was running an unlicensed fishing business. Each move was bolder, nastier, more desperate. She wanted control, and she wanted me broken. But what she didn't understand was that every step she took only pushed me closer to the truth. I drove into town, straight to the courthouse. The old building smelled of paper, dust, and stale coffee. Behind the counter sat Joyce Miller, the county clerk who'd been there longer than anyone could remember. "Joyce?" I asked, sliding Margaret's paperwork across the desk. "Does this look right to you?" She peered through her thick glasses, lips pursed. Then she chuckled. "Son, this paperwork's messier than a soup sandwich. Missing boundaries, no surveys, no legal authority filed with the county. This HOA is smoke and mirrors." Her words lit a spark in me. If Margaret's authority was paper-thin, maybe I didn't just have resistance, I had a weapon. Joyce leaned closer. "You ought to look into your grandfather's deed. I recall something unusual about it. Something about mineral rights." Mineral rights? I hadn't thought about that in decades. That night, I dug through an old box of family papers. There it was, my grandfather's 1958 deed. Faded ink, yellowed edges, but clear as day, ownership of subsurface mineral and water rights. I sat back, heartbeat pounding. This wasn't just land. This was control of the lake itself. While I was uncovering the truth, Margaret was tightening her grip. She built a gleaming white vinyl fence across the old fishing trail, blocking the path elders like Frank had walked for decades. She stationed cameras pointed at the lake, red lights blinking like angry eyes. She even hired a private investigator to dig into my past, hoping to uncover skeletons. But the report came back clean. She wasn't dealing with a criminal. She was dealing with a homeowner who knew his rights. And then she set her sights on the county. She drafted petitions, organized meetings, and lined up allies, convinced she could paint me as a trespasser in front of officials. She was planning a grand presentation to commissioners, complete with catered food and a hired photographer. But I had my own plan, and it started with hiring a surveyor. When Jake Patterson finished his measurements, he whistled low. "Theo, your property extends 30 feet further than anyone thought. And these mineral rights, you might own more than just shoreline." I smiled. Margaret had no idea she was building her own downfall plank by plank. I brought the deed to Attorney Bennett, a sharp man with patience like steel. He studied the old papers, flipping through surveys and letters. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Blackstone, this is extraordinary. You don't just own land. You own the lake bottom. You own the water rights. Fishing, boating, swimming, they're all yours. Every inch of that lake belongs to you. I sat stunned, then grinned. So when Margaret says I'm trespassing, she's trespassing on you, he finished. The weight of it hit me. This wasn't just about me casting a line. This was about Margaret running a protection racket on my property. I closed the folder, calm as ever. Then I'll let her keep digging. And when the time comes, we'll show the whole town exactly whose lake this is. Tuesday night, the county meeting hall buzzed with tension. Margaret arrived early with her entourage, 3 neighboring HOA presidents in matching blazers. She carried binders, charts, even a slideshow ready to declare her triumph. When the commissioners called her up, she practically floated to the podium. Her voice dripped with authority. Commissioners, we face a crisis. Unregulated fishing, declining property values, safety hazards. This lake requires order. Our HOA has taken responsibility where ownership is unclear. We request official enforcement powers. Her supporters clapped, smiling smugly. She thought she'd won. Then Commissioner Williams asked, "Any responses?" I stood, boots heavy on the floor, manila folder in hand. I walked to the podium and spoke calmly. "Thank you for your time. I'd like to clarify property ownership." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret smirked, expecting excuses. Instead, I laid my grandfather's deed on the desk, the county seal shining under the lights. This document proves ownership of Pine Ridge Lake, mineral rights, water rights, lake bottom, passed legally from my grandfather to me, and I've paid taxes on it faithfully for 23 years. Margaret's face drained of color. Attorney Bennett rose. "Commissioners, the HOA has been charging illegal fees for access to Mr. Blackstone's private property. Every fine, every violation, every restriction, they were unlawful." The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, even laughter when the sheriff stepped forward and said, "Wait, you wanted me to arrest the lake's owner?" The commissioners ruled swiftly. The HOA had no authority. All signs, fences, and cameras were to be removed immediately. Margaret's dream crumbled in front of her eyes. Within days, the signs were gone. The fence ripped out. The cameras dismantled. The HOA collapsed like a house of cards. Neighbors cheered. Betty's gnomes returned to full glory. Frank walked the fishing path again. Families who'd once been divided by fear now worked side by side, repairing the land Margaret had scarred. One Saturday, we held a community restoration day. Smoke from grills filled the air. Kids laughed on the docks. And for the first time in months, Pine Ridge Lake felt whole again. Margaret, she vanished. Her BMW disappeared down the road, and within 2 weeks, a for sale sign stood in her yard. She left in silence, her empire of control reduced to nothing but bitter memory. I carved a new sign for the boat launch. Blackstone Family Lake, all welcome. Fish responsibly. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about restoring community. Looking back, Margaret taught me something valuable. Bullies thrive on fear, but they crumble in the face of truth. She thought she could intimidate a man with laminated signs and fake authority. What she didn't know was that I held the cards all along. Justice doesn't always come from courts or cops. Sometimes it comes from knowledge, from digging into dusty deeds and finding the rights that others overlook. The lake remains open today, not because of an HOA, but because of respect. We fish, we walk, we laugh. We share the water the way my grandfather intended, free and fair. So what would you do if someone tried to charge you for your own land? Would you roll over, or would you fight back with the truth? Drop your HOA nightmare stories in the comments. I read every single one, and maybe your story will be the next I share here. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching a bully realize they picked a fight with the wrong fisherman, one who owns the whole battlefield.